Nicholas, welcome to the Medium podcast. How's the week been?
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. Happy to be here. Good week so far. I'm in Hong Kong right now. It's been opening up a little bit. Pools have been opening, and that was like the highlight of us. And then last week, like good weather and pool opening. I'm leaving about 3 weeks from now, so it's treating me well in that regard. Yeah.
Fantastic. So to our audience, I know we had a bit of a brief conversation. Normally, I don't do this because a lot of the times when I make an introduction to a guest, I put it as a description. So consider yourself the first person that I'll be introducing to on the podcast. So a bit of background, guys. I met Nicholas probably maybe 5 years ago, I think briefly. Like you and I, we both started at the software company Freshworks pretty early on, hey?
Yeah.
And
it's been quite a while. 5 years, I think 5 years.
5 years, hey. And what's interesting is that you and I, we're in opposite sides of the world. We're in different teams, yet here we are.
Yeah, very true. I think this is one of the things I'm really grateful for when it comes to like my time at Freshworks. I really feel it was my first job, and I had the opportunity to meet so many cool people all around the world. I think what connected us maybe is I feel both the Australian office and the Freshworks office like were some of like the first persons working in that office, right? So even though it was like other ends of the world, I think in that sense we're in the same boat. You have a company being headquartered in the Silicon Valley, but the heart and soul of the company being in India, and then you're sort of like a little bit on the fringes, and you're like opening up that office and like building all of that. So
yeah, and I think that's where we had that connection in terms of being at this company very early on, hey?
Yeah, true.
Fantastic. So tell me, obviously you mentioned you're heading back home. I know from our prior conversations you're getting married too. Are you going to miss Hong Kong?
I'm gonna miss it definitely. I've been here for 1.5 years now, mostly for personal reasons. So I am already married. So got married quite sort of like in December 2020, and essentially got married to travel to Hong Kong because so I've married my long-term girlfriend. We've been together for 8 years before we got married. And she had a job opportunity in Hong Kong. It was clear that she would go there for 2 years. I wanted to come with her. So at that time, the borders were completely locked. So the only way for me to actually go there was, to get married. And we did that in a pretty crazy fashion. So we've been only sort of like, we knew 24 hours before we were getting married that we would get married because it was still this sort of like COVID period. Everything was a little confusing when it came to German bureaucracy. So I came here with her, and like it's been 1.5 years, and I gotta say I love the city. So many good things going for itself, and we actually met a lot of great friends in those 1.5 years, and I think that's always ultimately places are about like the people you meet there, like the experiences you make. And so in that sense, I really enjoy my time here.
It's interesting, isn't it? I know we had a chat previously how the expat life in Hong Kong during COVID and post-COVID is very different to pre-COVID, isn't it?
That's what I'm told. I mean, to be frank, there wasn't a single day where we didn't have to wear a mask outside in Hong Kong. We always, it was always about sort of like COVID was always there for the time we've been here. But I think from what I've heard from people who've been here for longer, they say definitely it's a big difference. Like you have way fewer tourists. Like, I don't know, you can go here, hiking is a big thing in Hong Kong, and hiking up to the peak, like we're doing that regularly. And I heard from people, well, a few years ago, that would be so crowded, it's not really enjoyable. And it's like one of our activities, and we've never experienced any other way, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, eh? It's because I personally know the Hong Kong, it's interesting to see how the city will evolve post-COVID. Obviously, with China in the background as well. You know, with the friends that you've made, Nicholas, will these carry on, you know, when you go back home? And
I certainly hope so. I mean, I'm falling a little bit prey to living in that expat bubble. So actually, a lot of the friends I made here, they often have some sort of like local connection. A lot of people who were maybe their parents or the grandparents emigrated out of Hong Kong into Europe. I know quite a few of Dutch people, Scottish people. So they grew up in Europe, but then at one point they wanted to sort of like explore, I guess, that side of like the history of the family history, and they came here. A lot of them speak Cantonese, but then they also
oh,
like they have
wow.
all this very like Dutch upbringing or Scottish upbringing. So I think for them it's yeah, quite an interesting experience to be back and like explore that. And I'm sure we'll see them again in Europe. I'm sure they'll be back. Yeah, so I do hope that these friendships maintain, but sometimes it's difficult to tell, right? Like I feel you always you share a lot, like you're in the same place for like a certain time period, and it's often this sort of like transitionary, like big city experiences. Been living before in Berlin for 6 years. It's very similar in that regard. I feel there are not that many people who sort of say, I want to grow old in Berlin. It's a place where I want to start a family. But it's often people coming there for like a few years. You're having a good time together, and a lot of some of these relationships, they will eventually sort of like they fizzle out, right? Because you don't have that shared experience anymore as people sort of like move to other places. But as long as you make some good friends along the ride, and you have at least a few people where you can sort of like build sort of like deeper connections which last longer. I think that's the goal. It's probably better to have like a few really deep friends from a place, at least my perspective. That's what I'm striving for.
Interesting. Now, I was going to say to you, you know, you mentioned Berlin. So it seems to me it's very much a transitory city, Berlin. Like people would flock to Berlin from a career point of view. Is that correct? Or
Many do. Like I'd say Berlin, it has that reputation of being Europe's place for partying. You have a lot of people who sort of like want to start off in media and go to Berlin. It's one of the reasons I was actually not excited to go to Berlin. I felt like it's always a super hip city. Everyone is moving there for like living their hedonist lifestyle for like a few years in their 20s, late 20s. I think I was super happy ultimately with my time in Berlin though. Like I moved there, and the city has so much other things going for itself. And there's also a lot of people, to be honest, a lot of people who just stay in Berlin, and they actually do decide to get kids there. And I think Berlin, in a lot of ways, is also at the forefront of urban city development. Like there's so much. Like I was just reading today, like an article, how they're starting a whole neighborhood. They're sort of like doing away with all the cars in that neighborhood. So they're getting intentionally rid of all the parking places, because they polled people and they said that most of them are unhappy with the amount of space cars take up. And you have in Berlin, a lot of the discussions in Berlin is about housing, that it's not affordable anymore. Berlin used to be a very cheap city to live in, and has drastically changed over the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of discussions on, okay, what can we do as a city, as a community to sort of like alleviate that pressure on a housing market. And I think in that sense, Berlin is also like, it's a very rich city. I'd love to go back at one point. I have so many friends there. I'm sure I'll visit very often.
interesting. I was going to say to you, you know, Hong Kong is also renowned for being a bit of a party area, very much like Berlin. I think the comparison is a bit hard to make because of you moved to Hong Kong during COVID. Obviously now when you're going back home, are you going back straight to Berlin first, sorry, or are you going to go back to Helsinki? Sorry.
No, we're actually going to Helsinki. So, and that will be our home base. So we'll live in Helsinki. I've spent maybe about 5, 6 months in total of my life in Helsinki, I would say so far, sort of like visiting family, friends, spending like a week here and there. I think longest maybe I've been consecutively was maybe 2 months, 2.5 months. So yeah, no, we're moving to Helsinki, and it's going to be very different from Hong Kong, right? Helsinki is a relatively small city. It has 500,000 inhabitants. If you take like the greater Helsinki area, it's about 1 million. So there's
And
like
you
sort of
compare that to
places.
Berlin, what's the population in Berlin?
I think Berlin is like 3.4 million or so. So yeah,
And Hong
it's
Kong's about, what's Hong Kong nowadays?
I think 7.5 if you like
Wow.
include all
So
the new territories and so
three and a
yeah.
half Berlin, 7 million Hong Kong COVID, 500,000 Helsinki.
Yeah.
And Nicholas, originally, where are you from, Nicholas? Sorry?
I'm originally from Germany, from Cologne in the west of Germany. And yeah, I came to Berlin for that first job at Freshworks we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's been about like 6 years in Berlin before now coming here.
Wow, it's a bit of a journey, obviously, eh? It's going to be a
Yeah,
huge contrast between, Berlin, Hong Kong, Helsinki, eh?
I think any place in Europe, right? Like Hong Kong, I think it's also funny how quickly you get used to just the immense scale of things, right? Like there's like there are not that many buildings, I think, in Germany, which are more than 20 floors, right? And now it's
Really?
very normal to sort of like live in a place like we live in on a 31st floor. And it's just like we got so used to that, right? Like everything is super big. And I remember, I mean, Cologne is by German standards, Cologne is not a small city. Cologne also has like 1 million people. And then you come to Berlin and you feel, oh, Berlin is so big, right? And now here in Hong Kong, I mean, obviously like Hong Kong is at the upper end, right? I'm not sure what's
So
even
everything's all
more
built up.
crazy. Yeah. It's not much behind Hong Kong, but yeah, no, it's funny how quickly you get used to things like this. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, if we then parlay it back to Helsinki, buildings are probably what? Like I've been to Helsinki doing my honeymoon, and it's a lovely place. I could, I'm not saying Helsinki is a place to retire to, but I could see myself living my days in Helsinki because it's peace and quiet. It's lovely. It's not much people. So what's the plan in Helsinki?
That exactly, I guess. It's got to be more quiet for sure. But
Yep.
I think it's almost intent, right? I feel you just got to embrace what's sort of like what's special about a certain place. So what we're, for example, doing in Helsinki is we'll live much closer to nature. We
Oh, that's
just
brilliant.
sort of like from here ordered a kayak because we want to pick up some kayak and water sports because Helsinki is right next to the water. There's something like you couldn't, I mean, in theory you could do in Hong Kong, but like you have only yacht clubs, and it's like extremely expensive, right? But it was one of the things, at least in Berlin, which we missed, that it was always such a chore to sort of like go out in the nature, sort of like around Berlin. We didn't have a car in Berlin, so that's a lot of work, and you don't end up doing that too often, right? You go to a park within the city, but it's not the same as really being outside in nature. Maybe it's also, for me, I grew up in the outskirts of Cologne, so that maybe that's my ideal living environment in that sense, right? That
Interesting.
you have access to a city, you can go there 20-30 minutes and you're in the city center, but you can also go for a run and you are actually in a proper forest and not just in a park inside a city. And that is something which we're looking forward to for Helsinki, because it's yeah, it's just that much closer to nature. And yeah, I think that you just got to embrace, right? You can't compare it with Hong Kong. You can't compare the
Yeah.
nightlife or the food. I think it's one of the things we really enjoy in Hong Kong. I think it's going to be very different in that regard, but it's going to have its own sort of like size, and you just got to embrace that.
Fantastic. Well said. So you're very much going to be embracing what Helsinki can offer. You make a good point. You really can't compare apples to apples, so to speak, because every sort of city has its own sort of uniqueness. So for yourself, it seems Helsinki is very much a city that suits your personality and your way of life.
Yeah, I think this is at least it's a right city for like the next phase in life. I mean, every city is like very multifaceted, right? I think it's a little bit, there's not that one Helsinki, but at the same time, of course, like Finland has a very distinct sort of like culture and way of living. It's something I'm looking forward to, and I haven't, like, as I said before, so I've been with my wife now for more than 9 years and
Wow.
never picked up learning Finnish because it's an extremely difficult language. I was always making grand promises in the beginning. Yeah, no problem, I learn it. That's one
You
of the
have to
things I
now.
really I have to do now. And
You got no
I
choice.
was saying, yeah, I said, yeah, I would refer back to it, sort of say, no, I need to move to like Finland to actually like have the language all around you. And I mean, I really believe that, but now the work starts. So yeah.
You mentioned the people in Finland, they have a certain way of life. What do you mean like that?
I mean, Finland in all these studies is like one, like happiness studies. Finland would usually be one of the happiest countries in the world, or the happiest country in the world. And I think it's related to the people there. I feel people are in general quite content with what they have.
Yeah, why is that?
Maybe,
I see it a lot with sort of the Scandinavian nations, right? But now I'm talking to someone who's lived in Sweden. I mean, sorry, lived in Helsinki. Wife is Finnish, so you know it all in a way.
yeah, I'm not sure if I know it all yet. I hope to find it out moving there, but it has a lot of good things going for itself. I think Finland, but also Scandinavian countries, right? Broadly, it has really good education, some of the best education systems in the world, right? Get good healthcare. You have sort of like taken care of by the state, and you have a very sort of like egalitarian society in the sense that I think there's people don't have like the same sort of like polarization you have in like a few other places. I think, of course, you have some tendencies, you have that anywhere in the world, but I think in general, Finland being more equal and people appreciating that, it's at least my image from the outside, right? Let's see how maybe that changes a lot when I move there, and maybe we'll have a recap of that a year down the line, 2 years down the line.
Interesting. So very much egalitarian, very much the people looked after by the government. So it's very much a nature of how the nation is run. I'm actually very curious to see why, Finland or sort of maybe sort of Scandinavian nations overall, at least, top 3 in terms of that sort of the World Happiness Index. I hear that the whole maternity and paternity leaves are very generous.
Yeah, for sure. I think in general, they have very, very generous social policies. But yeah, it's quite remarkable. I haven't, to be honest, I want to study that a little bit more, but I think it is remarkable. For example, Finland hasn't been, if you look back, like historically, it hasn't been like a super powerful country sort of like in the past, right? Like it was always sort of like part of Sweden, part of Russia, and then sort of like got
Yeah, you don't
independent.
really hear about it,
But
so to speak.
yeah, and I think Finland in particular is interesting in the sense that if you go to like Copenhagen or Stockholm, you would see these amazing palaces from the past because these were really sort of like rich cities back then, right? Maybe the countryside wasn't so developed, but like you had a strong sort of like merchant culture, I think, in those cities, and they grew rich even in sort of like the medieval ages. In Finland, it was always sort of like on the edges, but it managed to sort of like really in the last 100 years have a remarkable sort of like story, like how it grew. And I think I'm not sure what's all at the bottom of that. I'm very interested in history, so maybe
Yeah, I think we need to save
I
it
study
for
that a little bit there.
podcast number 2. And from a work point of view, will you be carrying over the remote life of your current role to Finland, or?
Yeah, I'm quite fortunate in that way. So I've sort of, as my time at Freshworks came to an end, I sort of like in my final years at Freshworks, I joined the product team at Freshworks. So building our omni-channel solution on a fresh desk as a product. You know it well, right?
Got to keep it fresh.
Well, I enjoyed working in product a lot. I feel it brings I have a business background, personally business and economics. And one of the concerns I had about tech is like, I felt like it's either sales or like there's not that much else for someone with a business background in a company when you really want to sort of like make it. And then I found product as a sort of like perfect intersect between you bring in some of your business acumen and then you combine that. I was always interested in the technical side whenever sort of I was at a path where I could go sort of like on a more or less technical way. I always went sort of like in a more technical one. I enjoyed product quite a lot. And I'm now working for remote work company in that sense. So we're a global payroll company, make it very easy to hire anywhere in the world. So let's say you want to hire someone, you're based in Australia, but you want to hire someone in Germany. You wouldn't have your own legal entity in Germany to put that person sort of like on your own payroll and employ that person. So you can go through us. We pretty much have entities anywhere around the world, or we don't have our entities, we have partners we can connect you to, and make it super easy to hire anywhere in the world. And of course, it's sort of like working for that company. We have that as a
bit of a
as the same benefit. Yeah.
Wow. So this company basically allows an overseas company, for example, look to hire in Finland, and your company provides the partner, or the software to be able to do that, or I'm just curious to understand where the product element comes into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the foundation of that is like a legal entity and an employment agreement, right? So you would say you have a company in Australia, you want to hire someone in Finland, you contract with our entity in Singapore, is usually sort of like where our headquarters is. And you say, hey, I want to employ someone in Finland. And that person will work 100% of their time for you, right? They are, in that sense, they're your employee, right? It's not like some staffing agency or so. It's really a person who will only work for you. Usually you bring that person, right? You already know that's the guy I want to hire in Finland. And then we take care of the rest. So we have a partner or an entity in Finland. We employ that person. So there's an employment agreement between Horizons and that person. And we take care of a lot of aspects of that employment. And then on a product side, it's a bit of a mix between a traditional HRSM system, right? Think Workday, Bamboo HR, sort of like where you keep track of employee data. We combine that with expense management, think Expensify or File or Concur. And then also with payroll software. So Gusto, for example, super big in the US, or PayFit. So we bundle all of that into one sort of like software platform.
Interesting.
So the employee in Finland would use our software product, for example, to raise an expense report, and you would sort of approve that expense report, and then gets added to that person's payroll automatically. And all of that happens on our software platform. It's a very interesting, very like country specific industry, of course, right? You have so much country specific relation, and that's really sort of like operating compliantly in that environment. That's like that's a tricky part.
Interesting. So if I'm a tech startup, for example, I need to hire in 5 different countries. I just basically outsource the service to you. You guys handle the whole regulatory, employment law, payments, expenses, everything. But at the end of the day, that employee is still mine, but I manage that employee from a compliance point of view with you guys.
Yeah, exactly. Like
fantastic. Wow.
That's exactly what we do. Yeah.
Lovely. And you mentioned previously, Nicholas, that you were working on a sort of a key product enhancement. If you don't mind me asking, I'd love to learn more about that, if it's okay for you to share.
Yeah, sure. No, happy to share a bit about that. So we, I think sort of like for the history of the company, right? Like this business is something which you can do essentially also with like an Excel sheet and email, right? Like in a little bit more than that. Maybe that's an oversimplification.
Offering.
Yeah, but you could sort of like, you could go in and you could register a business in Australia, right? And you could sort of like offer your services to other people and say, hey, I could hire on behalf of you. I could become like an employer of record, a professional employment organization, right? Like you could sort of like register for that, and you can attract customers and like talk to a legal expert and have a Word template with a contract and sort of like run that on your own. And that's sort of like a very operations driven mindset, right? Like you can sort of like scale, at least is what it means for me, sort of like operations driven, is that you figure out the mechanics and you just like do that sort of like efficiently, but even it might require a lot of like manual work, right? But you can do it. And what we're doing right now is sort of like the company has started like that in the past, and we're now turning into a full-blown tech company, right? So we're doing a lot of workflows where we're looking at, okay, how's it currently done? And then how can we build a product that is either like making that flow super efficient, right? That we need way more, like way less sort of like human interactions, or maybe we can rethink the whole process, right? Because some of like the things which you did in the past, maybe they were just because you were limited without actually having a software product which you can sort of like completely form yourself. And this is it's a super interesting thing, and a feature we've worked on is it's just invoicing, right? This was one of the first things we've tackled, is that actually wanted to automate that whole aspect around that, because ultimately that's the business we're in, is generating trust, and like having accurate invoices as part of that, obviously, and automating that whole flow. We spent a lot of time to sort of like make that perfect, and also give a lot of transparency, because this is, as an industry, is often a little bit opaque in a sense that, I don't know, you have players who are trying to earn money with exchange rates, right? Like exchange, like let's say, because typically you would want to pay for the service in Australian dollars, but then the person in Finland earns euros. There are a lot of like FX exchanges, and then
make a spread.
Players, exactly, there's a little bit of a spread. It's like how a lot of players earn money in that industry, and we from the start sort of said, no, this is not what we want to do. We want to be very transparent, and that also played a role, of course, how we designed the features sort of like around that. We say, okay, what's all the context which we can give for an invoice, for example, to make it really easy for the customer to understand that invoice, because it's typically, you wouldn't be familiar with the employer burdens you have to pay in Finland, right? To Finnish government, maybe you have to pay unemployment and healthcare, like for your employer, you don't know, right? So you need a lot of trust in like the partner you're working with, and transparency, from my perspective, is like one of the core value.
Trust, transparency, win-win. It's huge. So it's actually that's actually very challenging roles. It seems very challenging, because that means that you guys would need to stay on top, basically, of every single type of regulatory or HR law around the world. Is that correct? Or
in a sense, yes. It's sort of like codifying the labor environments of like different countries, building.
But if you get it right, if you create that base, you therefore allow your product to scale.
For sure. And this is for a lot of like founders, especially, right? Like you mentioned, okay, you want to do your startup, and I think it's so hard to attract talent. And this was at least my takeaway from Freshworks, was always, hey, this is actually, if you tap into some of these markets, right? Like the traditional German company would not hire in Chennai, where we had like so many really talented engineers,
fantastic people.
They're struggling hard to find someone in Germany. And then if you can open up that talent pool, I think there's a lot of interesting. It's really, like you mentioned, win-win, right? Like in a sense, it's good for the companies, but it's also globally. I feel we're getting a little bit closer together, right? Like working on projects together. I think this is actually how you build a lot of the relationships, at least for me, right? Like I met a lot of friends really like over my 6 years at Freshworks.
Yeah, you've got me.
Exactly. And I think like for me at least, is like working together has a very strong, like it's powerful in that regard, right? A large part of my team now sits in mainland China. I've never had any contact like with anyone from China before, right? And of course, you read in the news and I don't know, positive and negative things, but something completely else to actually work on a day-to-day basis with a Chinese person and get to know them, get to know their perspective. And I think if we can sort of like create all of these connections around the world, with you're focusing together, you're working together on projects, I think that can be a very powerful force also for like, yeah, connecting people and yeah, bringing the world a little closer together. It's like a little bit of that cliche, right? Like
I like
making
it. I like
a better
it.
place. I don't want to sound too much like TechCrunch pitch, but yeah.
You know what's interesting is that you know, one of the big reasons of doing this podcast was to help us all embrace diversity of thought. You know, if you're working with someone from Chennai, you're working with someone from Beijing, from Sydney, Helsinki, Berlin, Marrakesh, for example, right? At the end of the day, we're all the same, aren't we?
Yeah. And this
So
is,
just,
I think, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
so I'm just curious, you know, just the whole invoicing thing. So invoicing in a sense of, you know, using that startup who's Australian based, wants to hire an employee in Finland. When you say invoicing, do you mean invoicing in the sense of that Finnish employee charging the customer in Finland, where the payment then needs to go through the whole Finnish law and ultimately back to Australia? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. This is essentially what we would do, right? Like you have to be compliant in Finland. The employee is employed as per Finnish law. So you have to pay, I don't know, to the Finnish authorities,
certain
whatever like the
taxes or
tax
whatever.
rates there is. Right? I think I'll find out. It will probably be higher than Hong Kong. I'm pretty sure about that. But doing that, right, like compliantly is sort of like figuring out these are all the burdens you're responsible for. Then you have a salary, you have maybe a variable pay, right? You worked in sales, commissions are big, or you in a startup, maybe you want to do it like ESOPs. Sort of like usually compensation is also like a complex thing in itself, right? And making sure that you can give customers all that flexibility that you can say, well, even if you go through us, you can do all these amazing things, right? For your employees, because this is also how you attract talent, right? Do you have that? Do you have competitive compensation packages, for example? And making sure that this is all ultimately like, of course, something which we would invoice you for as part of our service, right? Sort of like even if we pay all of that money as a legal employer to the local authorities, we would invoice you, for example, like in the end for your 4 employees abroad.
Fantastic. Very powerful tool. And from a revenue point of view, you actually got me very interested now. This is fascinating. So from a revenue point of view, you guys are turning into more of a sort of a platform in a way, because you might handle expenses, taxes, employment law, invoices, or whatever, right? So from a revenue point of view, does your end customer pay for the software itself? Is that primarily how you guys generate revenue? Or like you said, you know, you want to move away from taking a spread on the foreign exchange or taking a cut from a payment point of view, right? So how does the revenue model work for your business?
It is in that sense is a pretty standard like SaaS revenue model, like what we have at the moment. So just that you don't pay by user of the software, you don't pay per agent, right? But you pay per employee. So for every single employee you run, or like you employ through us, you pay a monthly fee, and that makes it very transparent, right? What I said before, we want to exactly move away. There would be probably a lot of ways you could hide costs in that model and sort of like go out and claim that you're not charging, but make it very, very transparent. Having said that, I think like one of the things why I joined the company, I felt it's a very there are so many opportunities, and you have in Europe, I think a couple of really interesting startups that grew very big lately with spend management, right? The likes of Brex, Ramp, Clio, right? Like they grew into a multi-billion-dollar valuation, essentially just by handling expenses and spend management. And I think going forward, it's simple in that sense, right? And of course, I think like, hey, maybe a few years down the line, right? It's not our focus right now, but a few years down the line, we can be your partner for global expansion. And maybe you don't just want to hire someone in Finland, but you also want to start selling in Finland, and you need help with like setting up a bank account, or the person in Finland maybe also just relocated to Finland and doesn't know what's a good healthcare insurance, or like what are some of the other benefits. And we want to grow into that role as a partner. And I think there's a lot of exciting sort of like opportunities in that space.
Wow. So I'm curious if I wanted to hire someone from Finland, what is the cost if I were to hire one employee? I'm just curious.
You mean if you hire through us, what's like the
Correct.
monthly cost?
Yeah. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. This would typically be a few $100 per month.
Yeah.
And this is essentially when you look at sort of, I think broadly, I need to look up the exact cost, but it depends on the location because also there's other responsibilities on the legal side coming with it, changing the cost, right? I think the lowest we have is like $299 in some locations and can go up until, I don't know, $699, I think is like our most expensive locations. And that's sort of that price point, and this is something where like this operational efficiency comes into place in building a software platform and making it scalable, because even if it's a few $100, it's prohibitive for certain markets and certain roles, right? It works if you want to hire your startup founder and you want to hire a software developer somewhere, right? Yeah, you're will to sort of like pay that money. But if we're talking about, we have so many amazing designers in Philippines or Indonesia, and a part of like sort of like if you add a few $100 to sort of like the cost of employing them, companies might be considering, they might say, hey, no, maybe I just like look closer for home. So one of the goals we have is to like to bring down that cost and make it affordable so it can work essentially for every market, every role, and sort of like democratize these like global employment opportunities, right? If you think about it from a job perspective,
Great
something
mission.
I always found like weird that you do the same job as someone on the other end of the world, but you get paid like 10x of that person. It's privilege, right? And I'm wonder sort
Privilege.
of like 10 years, 20 years down the line, whether it would be the same or whether we become a little bit more equal on a global scale in this way.
Wow, that's fascinating. So when you go back, so when you go to Finland, you can very much continue on this role, and that's pretty much the ethos of the current organization in terms of being able to work remotely. So is your organization completely remote?
It's not completely remote. So we have these hubs all around the world. So we have an office in Singapore, in Berlin, in Austin, in Shanghai. I, for myself, I'm remote in Hong Kong right now. There's no one else here. We have a couple of other people like me who are sort of like not associated with an office. But it's something certainly, right? Like you got to walk the talk in that way. I think it would be very hard to sort of say, hey, we're in this industry, and we say, no, we're like just in one place and we can only hire from this place, right? Like we certainly want to live up to that and sort of say, hey, we're a global company, and introduce some best practices where we say, hey, we can go out and also teach others how you can be a successful remote organization.
Fantastic. I'm sold. I'm sold. If the Medium podcast needs to hire people from around the world, you've got my money.
Sure, hit me up.
Yeah. So very much you are living the post-COVID world remote life where you essentially can work wherever you want.
I mean, of course, there's like, I have an employment agreement in Hong Kong, right? I can't, there's also certain, I think the regulatory environment is not there that I can just say, hey, I do 10 days in Hong Kong and I do like 20 days in Bali and then I go like to Finland for half a year. It's like, of course, there are certain limits in which you can do that. But I think at least I have an employer who's not seeing that as a blocker, right? Like if I say, I want to relocate to Finland because of my personal situation changes.
Go ahead.
They say, yeah, go ahead. And this was actually one of the reasons why I quit my previous job at Freshworks, because I had my wife sort of like moving here and I wanted to spend time with her. And I said, no, but I got to go to Hong Kong for like 1.5 to 2 years. And we didn't really find a way to sort of like make that work, right? And this is also what convinced me of Horizons in the first place, that I feel, okay, this is, we make this sort of like work for companies where otherwise it would be a blocker and you would let go of the person or you would not find the talent, and we sort of would make it realistic, at least, that you can stay with the company.
Fantastic. So how did you come across this role? It's sort of quite sort of serendipity in a way, how obviously with the previous company, it didn't work out in terms of you being able to relocate to Hong Kong to work. Yet what's ironic is that you then found a role that provided the service for Freshworks to be able to do
Yeah.
what you do. It's sort of coming, you know what I mean? Sort of coming full circle in a way.
Yeah, and it was certainly serendipitous that how I found this.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so I'm not sure. Like, so I made extremely good experiences with serendipity when it comes to job search. The job at Freshworks I got from talking to a stranger on a train ride. I'm not sure if I've ever sort of like told you a story
No,
before,
tell us the
but
story. Tell us the
I
story.
was in Cologne, living in Cologne at that time, sort of like after school. My now wife was in Helsinki, and we said we want to move together, and we decided, hey, Berlin is a place to go because very international city, most international city in Germany. And I was looking for jobs, and I was well, I had a degree, like a business, like bachelor in international management, and I did a master's in economics. I was mostly looking at known companies, right? I was considering like joining a consultancy, some sort of like big names. I looked up in Berlin, what companies are there, right? And I looked for jobs, and I was pretty close on signing a job. And then I was on a train ride, and this was really, I just go from Cologne to Berlin. I really pick like any of the trains. I think there's like 5 trains a day at least, or like even once an hour. Go to any sort of like compartment, and I met a guy who sort of like, I just talked to him, found him interesting, and he turned out to be in a process of setting up the European headquarters of that Indian software company, and got along super well with him, Arun, who can become my mentor, and I decided to join that company, right? I felt it's a little bit like this old movie Butterfly Effect, right? Like if I had done anything else on that day, right? Like, I don't know, I miss
It is.
my tram, I go to a different train, it would have completely changed my life, but I'm very happy with sort of like how that played out, right? So made really good experience with that, sort of like that element of serendipity. And I was like, for the new job, I had actually already, it was very similar. Apparently I didn't learn from previous experiences, because I mostly looked at jobs of companies that I knew, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, it's natural, right? Like you go out and you say, hey, this
You
company
find
could
the
be cool to
biggest
work
name. I'll
for.
work for the biggest name. That probably gives me the most money.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not sure about you, but like my LinkedIn is also like overflowing with in messages, and I typically never reply. And I had just like wrapped up one interview with a company where I felt like, this is probably it. I'm probably going to join that company. And then I got this LinkedIn message from like a guy sort of saying, hey, your profile looks interesting. And I felt, okay, why not? Why not do it, right? Like be a little bit like
Be
allow that
open.
serendipity. And then within just 1.5 weeks, I had like talked to all the founders, sort of like they made their pitch. I liked their energy. I liked how quick they were. I think it's like something which is super important for hiring, that you invite, like that you get back to people quickly, right? Like the other processes were a little drawn out, like 5 interviews over like 4 weeks, and like talking to the next team, and they all did it within 1 week. And I said, okay, yeah, why not? That sounds exciting. Like I'm in Hong Kong. It solves exactly the problem I had working with people in Shanghai, which is sort of like same time zone, and I can just gather some new experiences. And this is made very good
Wow.
experiences. I guess my if I ever like whatever the next thing is, I'll make sure to not just look at the big names. I think like twice got that message that
So
you should.
basically, you found this role. Basically, you've been getting a lot of emails. They saw that you now. So obviously, before you were in customer success, leading the customer success team.
So in a final like 2 years at Freshworks, I was already in product. So I started off in sales, because like when we started the office, we just had to put some numbers on the board. And I went into customer success because I was excited about the product. I want to learn more, and I like enjoyed the work of explaining customers how to use the product, help them with adoption. And then I had moved into product at Freshworks. So that was my final. I was a lead product manager for Freshworks at that
It's
stage.
okay. You made a good point in the sense that I do find sometimes when you do join a software organization that is headquartered overseas, in Australia in particular, Nicholas, it is very much a sales satellite office. And I know in this conversation, you made it very clear that when you go into these organizations, it's pretty much just sales. And so it's great that you made the change in the product. So essentially, you got the email, you said, why not? You were open to it. The interview process took 1.5 weeks. They said Hong Kong. Your wife was going to Hong Kong. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, but one minor correction is I was already in Hong Kong at that point, so
right.
Yeah, I'd already been here.
Got it. Oh, so you were searching for a new role whilst in Hong Kong, and your wife was already sort of established. I remember the conversation before.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, perfect. Works out well, eh?
Yeah, I think sometimes, of course, it's also
sometimes doesn't always work out.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, I mean, probably this is the thing, right? Like in the other company, I would probably also be happy. But at the same time, I'm really happy about how this thing turned out, and I had a really good time. So yeah, I'm grateful, and I feel like, yeah, really for me, I am someone who's usually sort of like, I would overthink certain decisions a lot, right? Spend a lot of time going through like the pros and cons, and then I think sometimes you also, with at least with this sort of like decision, I feel I'm more happy if I just listen to my gut. And sometimes, you know, sort of like what to do when it sort of like presents itself to you. And like, yeah, then even within a week, you can sort of say, okay, no, let's change plans and rather do this.
Interesting. Tell me a bit more about the gut. So as opposed to overanalyzing the situation, you very much rely on the gut.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult sometimes to put into words, right? What exactly does it mean?
Yeah, what is the gut to you?
Yeah.
What does it mean by your gut?
Yeah. Depends, of course, on a context, but for example, that previous job with Freshworks, right? So I met Aaron on a train and had really good conversations for 3 hours. And I went out of that train, and actually my father picked me up from the train station. I kind of joked like, hey, I think I found my guru, maybe I want to work for him. And she was like sort of making fun of that. But what I meant is, it seemed like a person I can learn a lot from. And I think this is, at least in the beginning of your career, that's the most important thing, right? That you have a place where you can feel like you can grow professionally into a direction you're sort of like excited about, and you have those learnings. I think that was just something I could sort of like, I could feel, right, in my gut, if you will, that this is something where, yeah, I can take a lot out of that. And maybe more so compared to like an established company, right? Like, yeah, it might be the better name on a CV. You never know sort of like how these bets sort of like turn out. But I didn't really doubt at all whether that's someone I can learn from, and that's how, like, what I based my decision on. And I think that's ultimately, right, even if you talk to for 3 hours to someone, you have the feeling, okay, it's like good stories to tell, like has a good
was that Berlin to Cologne, or like what?
Yeah, Cologne to Berlin. Yeah.
Wow, Cologne to Berlin, 3 hours.
Yeah.
Wow. And you were the second employee, is that correct?
Yeah. I joined because we hadn't really set up a company yet. So we, I think the very first office, like everyone was still based in New York, and we just put a little like sign next to my doorbell in Berlin, and that became the first Fresh Desk office, was back then.
Wow, that's huge.
Went from there.
Yeah, and I was employee number. So apart from Srilesh, who was been with the company for since its founding, basically as a first employee, I was basically employee number 3 at the Sydney office. So it's very much very exciting, isn't it? But I think you made a very good point about you want to go somewhere where you can learn fundamentally.
Yeah.
By all means, there are nuances to life where you need the money, and so be it. But it seems it's quite common, isn't it? The beauty of this podcast is that I get to speak to a lot of people around the world as well, and it's very similar what we want. To learn, to grow.
I think this is super, super interesting that you made that jump, right? Like from sales into podcasting. I listened to some of the other episodes. I think it's very, Very cool. Like I was expecting it's like just one of these other like business podcasts and you were just
Mm.
talking about sales, but yet very sort of like, yeah, just discussions with fellow humans in that sense, right?
That's
Like
it.
asking about like a lot of different topics. So yeah, how like what have you learned like recently as part of like your podcast journey? Is there anything? Because I guess you're now in an environment where sales is always a little bit like that, right? But you just depend on yourself in that sense for
Mm.
to make this a success. So
Oh, in terms of what I've learned so far, or
yeah, like how's it been so far?
I don't know where to I don't know where to start and where to end, so to speak. I've learned so many different things. How should I share this with you? From a business point of view or from a people point of view?
Maybe more from a people point of view, right? Or like what I think what I'm especially interested in is like sort
Mm.
of that transition from like I would say a more typical job, right? Like you sales, you earn like good money, and now you're deciding, no, I'd rather spend my time having conversations with people, right? Like sort of like what brought about that change. I think this is what I'm most interested in. Sorry if I'm
Oh no,
turning this
no,
around,
it's a
but
good
that's
question because
yeah.
someone asked me the same question before, and I promised her that I was going to give her a one sentence answer. But then when I try to put pen to paper, it's been very much a culmination of many things, Nicholas. I think fundamentally, I wanted to create a platform, an avenue where people can be themselves. I think we're in a society nowadays where there's a lot of categorization. You know, you're far left, you're far right, you're from Hong Kong, you're white, you're black, you're yellow, you support that team, you support that team. So I feel that there's a lot of categorization, and I think you made a key point about there's a bit of polarization sometimes I find in society nowadays. So I said to myself, okay, you know, I've tried a dating business, I've tried SaaS, I've been in finance before. I suppose I still don't know what I'm doing. I'll be honest with you. But what's interesting and what I've learned from making that transition, it does seem like something very different. But I think deep down, if I were to connect the dots looking back, in 2010, I had a dating business called Gentleman Player.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it was a dating business that provide dating workshops for men. Terrible idea.
Yeah.
Terrible idea. Um,
Yeah.
what's interesting is that the tagline I had for the business was elevating you to the next level. So I think this podcast is very much a manifestation of how do I elevate you to the next level as an individual. And I'm doing that by allowing my guests just to share their story. Um, I think another part of it sometimes is that when you're in an organization or in society, you need to be very careful of what you say, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I wanted to strip away that.
Hmm.
So you asked me, do I have some sort of qualifying criteria that I have for guests? I just have one. You need to be yourself.
Yeah.
So this Medium podcast is very much a platform where people can share their story and be heard.
Hmm.
And I find that quite enjoyable to be talking to you, to be talking to someone in Brussels, to be talking to someone in New York. And what I realize is that fundamentally we're no different. We all really just want the same thing. So if I do leave this world, but I leave it in a better place, I reckon that's a pretty good outcome.
This idea of stewardship, right? That you leave the place a little bit better than you found it. I think it's very,
Yeah,
you
and that's
really
pretty.
live it. It's very profound. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, you know. And needless to say, this is this is still a concept. It's a business idea. And by all means, from a cash flow point of view, it's very important to sustain this podcast. Like, I'm happy to share this because it is what it is. I've got nothing to hide. It is what it is. And getting back to what your company is about, transparency. I've got nothing to hide. What you see today is me. When I'm talking to you, I want to see you, and that's pretty much it. And I think my audience is appreciating the honest conversations I have with people.
Yeah, I certainly do. I mean, that's what convinced me to sort of say yes. I feel these are real people, and you don't listen to that too often, right?
Yeah.
It's also, of course, you need that sort of like impetus. I think like us discussing was like what made me sort of like listen to in the first place. But then, yeah, you listen, you find yourself listening for half an hour to an hour with like a conversation with also someone you hadn't talked to, like some of these, right? Like in a longer time, and actually having like good conversations. And I feel this is, I mean, I'm not, maybe I misunderstood like the elevate yourself. I'm not sure, maybe you want to.
Oh, so basically,
I feel, because like for me, it was exactly not that, right? You have so many podcasts which are all about sort of like self-improvements, and you should always get better and become the next level of yourself. But what I actually liked about the discussions, I feel like, okay, no, these are just normal people in that sense, right? And also giving oneself the strength to sort of say, no, I could do that, right? Because I was when I saw your message at first, I was thinking, do we even have like interesting things to say? Like, can we talk for like 90 minutes on something, right? Because we haven't talked for like a few years. We had chats before, and like listening to others, I thought, no, probably like this is super interesting, and maybe I actually have something to say, right? And this is I like this normal aspect of
it's just normal,
it's actually
right?
not improvement. Yeah.
And you're right, like we don't always have to move forward. We don't always have to improve. But getting back to you a bit about elevating you to the next level, that tagline, right? I suppose loosely, I'm just giving people a platform to be themselves. And that allows them to be happier. That in a way is elevating. Like I'm elevating my guests to be themselves, because we live in a society sometimes where there's a lot of political correctness. You got to be careful what you say. I didn't want any of that when it came to this podcast. I just wanted to have genuine conversations where it's unfiltered.
Interesting. What would you do though? Let's say you find someone, and I mean, you haven't talked for a few years, right? You invite him over, and then that person starts to sort of like saying vicious things you don't agree with. Like, have you ever thought about how you would handle that sort of situation? Because if you're saying like this is not about like political correctness and everyone should sort of like just be themselves, what if it turns out that this person is sort of like has absolute like weird views, right? Like, what would you do? Have you thought about that at all yet?
That would be okay, because I'm not here to judge whether what someone says is right or wrong. I think we all grow up believing certain things. We grow up in a certain way. I might disagree with him or her, but fundamentally, I'm not the person to judge. So I'm here to just listen. I'm here to exchange ideas. If you believe in a certain thing that's somewhat controversial, I would like to understand, why do you think like this? Why do you have a structured wrong view? It's not about right or wrong, because if you are here to share something very controversial with me and you fundamentally believe in it, then so be it. I'm not here to draw a line. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just providing a platform for you to be yourself. And if it's controversial, if there is something that I find that is quite disgusting, so to speak, right? That's just my view on it. And I'm not here to judge it.
Yeah.
That's how I'll do it.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. It is one of the big questions of our times right now, right? Like how much moderation is sort of like the right amount on what level of the infrastructure like layer should you have moderation, right? Should that be on a sort of like application side? Should it be sort of like individual shows? But it's really, I think it's a very difficult thing, right? Because and at the same time is I mean, right now, like giving that platform, right, I think that's exactly it. Sort of like as you grow to a certain size, right? Like if you are like sort of like Joe Rogan level, he gets criticized for exactly that, for giving people a platform who others sort of say they shouldn't have a platform, they shouldn't have that reach, right? Yes, they have the freedom of speech, right? They can say whatever they want to say, but we shouldn't, like, society shouldn't give these people a platform. And then sort of like you have people sort of like going out and giving a platform regardless. I think some of that, it's like super difficult.
It's very tricky.
I really wouldn't want to work in a PM department of Twitter for that. I have a lot of respect for like figuring out the balancing act of moderation.
I suppose I'm in the camp of, I rather teach my kids, for example, to critically analyze than to tell them what's right or wrong. So it's difficult. If you do have some person who appears on the platform and spreads so-called misinformation, right? I think my belief is very much on the onus, obviously excluding kids because the mind is still being formed, and that in itself is very subjective, right? I rather we move towards a world where we teach all of us how to critically analyze something and to never take something for face value.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the super critical skills you need to have nowadays, right? That you can discern what is sort of like, what's a trustworthy source, what is like not so trustworthy, right? Like where you should analyze more, but it also comes with a certain responsibility from my perspective, right? Like if you, it's difficult, of course, sort of like, I think it doesn't really apply to sort of like your podcast at this stage where you sort of like interview people who you've met before, right? But I would say like, if you ever had a super controversial guest, I'd see it then, I agree with you, right? Like you can have a discussion on these things, but I think it would be, the onus would be also a little bit on you to sort of like prepare for that discussion and be sort of like have questions ready to analyze, right? Like to exercise that critical thinking and sort of like also know some of the things. So that you can critically question and doubt and sort of like present sort of like your side of the view. And I think this is what good journalism is about.
Exactly.
Right? That you have people who are also spending time and who sort of like hone that skill of probing and finding out and being relentless in that regard, right? I think this is finding the balance there between having nice discussions and doing that. I think this is like
you're right. You're banging on money. You know, like, you know, I have not had a guest who's been, you know, very controversial. But you're right. You know, if and when I do, it's very much, it's actually quite a hard job being in this position as the host, because you need to listen, you need to think a step ahead, you need to pace yourself, but you also got to make it in a way that it feels natural. And
that's from my perspective, this is like the difficult part about having actual conversations about anything, right? Like this is why I found that quite impressive, that you say, hey, we can sort of like just go with the flow, because that sort of controversies, if you do a business podcast, I think you would never have, right? Like, I don't know, what's like the most controversial thing someone could say is like, I think the LTV to CAC ratio should only be like, I don't know, whatever, right? Like,
you're right.
These kind of things, right? And that is usually where people get very sort of like emotional and like opinionated. Is rather, it's not like the business side of things, right?
It is a tough one, you know. The tagline for the podcast is embracing diversity of thought. Now, diversity of thought could mean super controversial, right?
Yeah,
it could be, right? Eh? I don't know yet. You raise a very good question, because you're right. There is a lot of talk right now about content moderation. How do you even approach that? And I was having a chat to my wife. Can AI even fix that? How can AI fix something which is so subjective to the individual level? So I'm very curious to see what Elon Musk is going to potentially do with Twitter. And what's interesting is that this podcast actually came from a thread on Twitter about sort of free speech.
Okay, I didn't know that. You should forward me that thread. I'll check it out.
Yeah, check it out, you know, and it was a bit of that. As you can probably tell, I like to believe I am a bit of a conversationalist. I do enjoy it. I'm generally am very curious. I like asking questions because I'm just curious as to why things are like this. Why do you think in a certain way? And to me, this is no different from me talking to anyone else. But the only thing that's different, I'm just hitting the record button.
Yeah, it gives you good reason to reach out to people and have conversations, right?
Yeah, and
Because we
I'm
would
very
not have talked otherwise. Right?
exactly. I'm very thankful that I've established conversation from 15, 20 years ago from people I've met.
Yeah, yeah, I can. This is nice, right? Like, probably should, even without a podcast, should probably do more of an effort to reach out to some of these, like, all the connections. Say, hey, it's been some time. Like, how are you doing? And then
What's
make a
interesting?
conversation with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. But since life is so busy now, I need to go to you, Nicholas. We are speaking on Tuesday, May 10th at 4:30 p.m. my time, 2:30 p.m. Hong Kong time.
Yeah,
Sometimes you need that, right? But when I'm talking with you, you're my focus. I've literally blocked out my calendar. Your name's on the whole calendar invite. I know today I'm talking to you and my attention is with you. Everything else is switched off. I use Apple for everything. I've got do not disturb. So I'm very much in the moment with you and I love it.
this is another, like, super important skill, right? Like, being able to actually sort of like get these distractions out, right? And really trying to focus. I think it's something we're all struggling with nowadays. At least I haven't met, like, even sort of like people meditating every single day and resting in themselves. I think usually there's still sometimes the urge to sort of like go to your phone and check out that notification. I think this is sort of like, yeah, spending that time and quality time. And it's not just like, it's any sort of like any time you're spending with folks, right? Especially when it comes down to family and friends.
It is
sort of like,
family.
how can you carve that out?
Yeah, family, relationship. That's what life's all about. And you mentioned, how are you going to even be talking for 45 minutes, an hour? Yeah, here we are. We've been speaking for an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like that, does it?
Quite quickly. No.
That's the beauty of the conversation. And I think there's also a bit of me like, how do we bring back these conversations? You look at the war, I know I'm simplifying things, right? But wouldn't it be easier if we all just sat down and talked to one another? Yeah. So you see how there's a multitude of influences as to why I'm doing this.
But that was, I think, overall, like, a very good answer. It's like a good project from my perspective. I wish you the best of luck having like a lot of interesting conversation here. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I'll certainly be listening.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm conscious of your time because we have almost hit an hour and 1.5 hours. And I want to make sure we always complete within a certain time. And any sort of final remarks, like give me something. At the end of our conversations, I always like to ask a random question.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You're ready, right? What are you most looking forward to as you begin a new life in Finland with your wife? The one thing you're most looking forward to.
Being closer, like you mentioned family and friends before, right? That's certainly something. I think Hong Kong, amazing city, like I said, we actually built new friendships. But it's something else to sort of like, it's been like almost a year that I went home. I saw my family, saw my friends. And I think that's something where, like, this time here also made me appreciate that more. It's one thing, it's the thing I'm currently most looking forward to, is sort of like being back in Europe, being closer to the people I love. And that's sort of like, that's right now the thing I'm most looking forward to. There's a lot of other things, right? Like, I think will be a lot of adventures, but it's mostly about the people and being back closer to Europe.
Beautiful. It's simple, isn't it?
In that sense, yes, it's simple. Like,
love it. So, Nicholas, thank you very much for your time. really appreciate you taking time out of your day to have a conversation. But I love it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. It was a pleasure, and yeah, best of luck, like I said before.